Mitch Lawrence joining me now. I've been looking forward to talk to Mitch all day because we just have a few things to talk about. Mitch Lawrence is host of a variety of SiriusXM NBA radio shows, writer for the Sporting News and Forbes for a very long time. You can follow him on Twitter at Mitch_Lawrence. And we're going to get right into it. Mitch, how are you today, man? Thanks for giving us a few minutes of your time.
Well, yeah, no problem, Ryan. How are you? Doing okay?
Yeah, man, doing well.
Good.
I'm a little bit bummed that that it's all over now.
Well, you know what? I was bummed the way the series just played out. When you have the big injuries to the big stars, that's never good. Long time ago, back in 1989, I covered the Lakers were playing Detroit for the second year in a row. And Magic Johnson was the reigning MVP. He had just been named the MVP for the regular season. This is he did a stretch of 4 years. He had 3 regular season MVPs. And everybody was really eagerly anticipating the rematch between the Lakers and Celtics. They had gone to, the Lakers and Pistons. They had gone to, I think, 7 games a year before. Anyway, in the first couple of games, he and Byron Scott, the starting backcourt for Pat Riley's Showtime team, went down to these hamstring injuries. And they got knocked out, and the Pistons swept them out in 4 games. And you just sat there, and I sat there covering it, and it was just like it's the biggest bummer in the world. And this kind of series reminded me of that because of what happened to Durant and then what happened to Klay Thompson. And, like the Pistons, Toronto took advantage of it. But it's always very difficult and kind of a downer to go, you get to the ultimate series, the finals, and you can't see the biggest stars. So that's what I'll remember about this series.
I'm with you. Being an NBA geek like myself, we were robbed. We were robbed of a potentially historic NBA Finals series when KD came back, that whole storyline. He comes out the gates hotter than ever, and then he goes down, and then you see Klay go down, and it's like between those 2 injuries, we could have been in for 7 games of great basketball.
I'll always think that if Durant was healthy from the get-go, it would have been a 5-game series because when Durant is right with the Warriors, they're head and shoulders above everybody else. Now, without Durant, just with Klay, I'm looking at last night's game thinking Golden State's winning that game because they can't deal with Klay Thompson. And the best thing to happen is that now there's not a Game 7 for Steph Curry to get hurt in. Because, it's just like they would have probably been beaten by 20 points up in Toronto on Father's Day and, on Sunday. So, yeah, it didn't end well for Golden State. I think their run is over. They'll still have Curry back. They'll still have Draymond Green. They're not going to have Klay Thompson. Kevin Durant could leave. He could still get a big contract for the Knicks despite the fact that he won't play any point for next year. But, the Warriors, it's a very interesting thing how you look at their quote-unquote dynasty now. It's kind of a mini dynasty, actually. But you know what? With Kevin Durant, they're 2-0. Without Kevin Durant, they're 1-2. And the one win was against the Cavaliers when, they didn't have, Kyrie Irving after Game 1 and Kevin Love. This is back in 2015, their first win. So they took advantage of a team. LeBron was going to war with Matthew Dellavedova back in 2015. He still won 2 games somehow, some way. And in this case, it kind of is like what goes around comes around. Now they're the injured team, and obviously they couldn't contend with Toronto and Kawhi Leonard. So just kind of a bad ending. They'll still be around, but they'll be a diminished team because next year they're not going to have their two of their key players, and then you just don't know about what they'll be in the future.
Mitch Lawrence joining us, SiriusXM NBA radio shows all week long. You can follow him on Twitter at Mitch_Lawrence, writer for the Sporting News and Forbes. You said that pretty casually, Mitch. Like, Golden State's done now. I mean, I know when you're looking at next year, it's hard to disagree with that, but when you look at what Draymond had to say after the game, and you're hearing it all over different media outlets today, that posing the question, is the dynasty done? It seems like you're saying yes. I mean, how did the dominoes fall now this summer?
Here's the deal. As long as Curry and Klay Thompson are there, and Draymond Green, I'll give him his due, they'll be a factor. Problem is, next year you're going to be missing 2 big pieces. And then, now these guys are going to be getting older, and you just don't know who else is going to be loading up in the West. I mean, what happens if the Clippers get Kawhi Leonard and another big-time free agent? What happens if Denver adds a big piece? What happens? We'll see what happens in L.A. with the Lakers and Anthony Davis. I mean, this is the first time in a couple of years, especially since Durant has joined the Golden State, where you're looking at the West, you're saying this kind of thing is more wide open than ever. This is kind of like how the East was when LeBron left just last year, right? I mean, The Warriors have never looked more vulnerable, and they're going to have to make changes. There are going to be changes. They're going to probably be, if they lose Durant, that's a huge change for them. That brings them back to the pack a little bit. So I'm saying it casually, but I'm saying it like looking at it realistically, because there are other teams. If I'm Daryl Morey, who's a very active general manager, as you know, in Houston, I am loading up as much as I can. I'm saying, man, look at the Warriors for next year. This is our opportunity to do what Toronto did once Cleveland broke it up when, LeBron left. So that's all I'm saying. And I think everybody, that's the obvious thing. The big question is, that's over, that kind of overrides all the stuff that's hanging over this stuff is, all right, so where are the free agents going to go now? How's that going to impact things in the Western Conference, especially because for the last few years, the Houstons of the world, the Portlands of the world, these are the teams that can't get past Golden State. Now it looks like they got a decent shot of it.
Yeah, now it looks like the window is open at least for 1 year.
Yeah.
When you look at Kawhi, does winning the title change anything? Like how do you read what he's going to do? I
still say he's gone. Yeah. And I was wrong about Paul George last year, like everybody else, because Paul George was telling everybody and anybody before he got to Oklahoma City that he wanted to play for the Lakers. He changed his mind. I guess he didn't want to deal with LeBron, or didn't want to deal with the pressures. When you go to, for Paul George, you think about playing for your hometown team, the Lakers. And, you got guys like Kobe Bryant who are always saying it's not about, making the playoffs. It's about winning championships. Paul George has never faced that pressure before, whether he played in India. First of all, whether he played at Fresno State, whether he played for the Indiana Pacers or now the Oklahoma City Thunder. Indiana and Oklahoma City, hey, they definitely want to make the playoffs. There's nobody there telling you got to win titles. So for whatever reason, he got more money. Okay, fine. I still think, and I've been saying this forever, Kawhi got traded to Toronto. It's like how Kyrie got traded to Boston. He looks like he's going to leave and come and play for the Brooklyn Nets. These guys, they don't owe anything to the franchises they get traded to. So I think Kawhi is looking at it like, hey, you know what? I gave them the greatest year in the history of their franchise. I can leave now free and clear. These people love me. I delivered on a championship, right? All right, I didn't play every game like maybe some people wanted me to, but the load management worked in the end because I was able to get, I was able to beat Orlando, Philly, Milwaukee, and the great Warrior team, knock off another dynasty like he did for the Spurs against Miami, be a Finals MVP. Now, to me, it's kind of like he's got a clear conscience. He can go anywhere. And, a lot of people think he's going to go back to Southern California and play for the Clippers. They think they got a shot, and, we'll see how it pans out.
Both of us, there's so many storylines when you look back now at this NBA Finals. And Kawhi Leonard sitting out, however you want to describe it, in San Antonio, that ended not very well. And now he gets traded to Toronto, and Toronto makes a huge, gutsy trade to decide to trade off DeMar DeRozan, bring in Kawhi on a 1-year rental deal, and they're holding up the Larry O'Brien 1 year later. I mean, where does this rank for you? I know a lot of other storylines may be trumping it a little bit, but when you really dive into that aspect of the story, it's really interesting to me.
Well, Ryan, I sent out a tweet as soon as the final buzzer went off. I sent out just a little tweet that said, the Kawhi Leonard trade, name one better. Oh, and people were going nuts. They're naming the Moses Malone of Philadelphia. Well, take into account the fact that this franchise, the Toronto Raptors, have been around for almost a quarter of a century, 24 years, and had done basically nothing. They got into one Eastern Conference Finals. They could never beat LeBron James. And when they went to the one Eastern Conference Finals, I think it was in 2016, they lost 4 games to 2. It was almost like a sweep. They never had a chance. And they're famous for what? They had Tracy McGrady and he walked, and they had Chris Bosh and he walked, and Vince Carter forced his way out. And all right, and so they made this, like you called it, a very gutsy move on the part of Masai Ujiri to bring in a guy on the last year of his contract, who, by the way, hadn't played much the year before. And so I'm just looking at it from the standpoint of the Toronto history, and they had the fact that this is the greatest player they've ever had. And I can't think of a bigger trade. I know. Bill Russell, the rights for Bill Russell a million years ago got traded from St. Louis to Boston, and, he won 11 titles in 13 years. I'm not saying Kawhi Leonard's Bill Russell. All I'm saying is for a team that had done nothing to acquire a guy who is in his era, one of the best players, I can't think of a bigger, better trade because the franchise had been not terrible. They'd be competitive at points, but they certainly can't. You can't put them in. Oh, this has been one of the great franchises of all time. They just come kind of like clunking along, especially with guys like Kyle Lowry and DeMar DeRozan. So I think it's just it's a great story for Toronto. I hope he stays from their standpoint, but I don't know if he will. And those people up there in Canada, because he really took. It's not just the city's team, Toronto, but up there, it's so many parts of Canada just love the Raptors. This guy's like a national hero now.
He really is. Crazy story. And when you go back over to Kevin Durant, what are the chances that the Knicks can woo him? I mean, is he still open, do you think? I know we're just playing a guessing game a little bit, but how does that potentially merge together?
Here's the deal. Kevin Durant, from everything you hear, wants to play in New York, which is an amazing thing when considering how bad the Knicks have been. For the best player, maybe you could argue 1A, 1B, whatever, however you rank them, that type of player has never wanted to play in New York before. And I'm talking about the recent free agents, going back to Shaquille O'Neal, going back to Kobe Bryant and LeBron James. They don't want to play in New York. They want to come to New York and hang out and have a good time and play against the Knicks and put up big numbers at the Garden and tell everybody, yeah, it's the Mecca, and that's
leave.
one thing. I like to visit there. But here's a guy who actually wants to play in New York, and they are desperate for a guy like Kevin Durant because they've never had a player. And I go back to the 60s and the 70s and the late 60s, 70s when they won the title with Willis Reed and Walt Frazier. They've never had a guy who's been a finals, back-to-back finals and MVP finals. Willis Reed, I think, is their only regular season MVP. Kevin Durant is a player who's going to go down in history as one of the great scorers and one of the great offensive players in the history of the game. For him to want to play for a dysfunctional team with all the problems they've had in the last 20 years under the great owner James Dolan, who has spent a lot of money and taken a lot of losses, it's incredible he even wants to come here. And yes, they would be willing to give him max money and have him sit out a year for the chance to have him for like 3 years, because that's how bad they've been, and they need a guy like that to keep the Garden packed, to keep selling the corporate tickets, to keep the celebrities coming in, which is a huge thing for James Dolan. So, you know what? They are hoping that Kevin Durant doesn't change his mind, because apparently he has sent them out some pretty strong signals. When you trade Kristaps Porzingis and you break up your team and you get 2 max slots, that indicates to everybody you have kind of an inkling of what you're going to do, just like the Nets. The Nets have a pretty good idea that Kyrie Irving wants to come back to play for the team he grew up for. Okay, they were located here in North Jersey back in the day, right?
Yeah.
So these teams make these moves because they're everybody's talking about, free agency is going to be, teams can start talking to players on June 30th. Teams have been talking to players for months. That's the way it works. There's tampering all over the place, right?
Yeah.
So the Knicks obviously know they got a shot at Kevin Durant, and now the fact that he's had a surgery done up here, he had a surgery done up here actually by a guy who's affiliated with the Nets, but he's up in the New York area. I mean, that's just the way it is. So I think the Knicks are still feeling like they're bummed out because they can't get Kevin Durant on the court right away if they sign him. But yeah, they're going to be very much we'd love to have him even sit out a year because we know we're going to get one of the top players in the sport. We'll see how diminished he is when he comes back. But you know what? That's the type of thing that the Knicks live for.
Yeah, exactly. And a diminished Kevin Durant could still be better than the majority of the NBA.
These Achilles things, you never know how guys are going to come back. They're the most brutal injuries guys can have now, even I think more so than ACLs. And we'll see what Kevin Durant's like when he comes back. Hopefully he'll be as great and as prolific a shooter and a scorer. I mean, he's such a great – I even rank him – look, I rank Kawhi a little bit ahead of him now because he's healthy, but he's not the offensive player. Kevin Durant, you see what he did at Game 5, and that's where we're all sitting there going, that's why I'm sitting there going, that's why I picked the Warriors to win this thing in 6 games, because I thought he would come back in Game 3 and they reel off like 3 or 4 wins in a row and get their three-peat, in order. But it didn't happen that way.
Yeah, such a shame it didn't. I just was hoping for a good series, at least when KD came back in Game 5. You're saying to yourself, all right, we're going to go 7 here, and it's going to be historic in some way. Wasn't the case. You mentioned Kyrie going to Brooklyn a few times, and how that ties into our market in this area is it seems like the chatter is growing with Tobias Harris going to the Brooklyn Nets. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, he's always been linked to the Nets. He's a Long Island kid. I think he somehow has a connection, maybe a brother or a family member with Kenny Atkinson, who's a Long Island guy also. I'm not so sure on that. But the Nets have been looking at Tobias Harris. First of all, go back to Kyrie. Kyrie grew up rooting for the Nets here when they were located in New Jersey. He looks upon them as a very favorable thing. He said a lot of things during the course of the year, like I want my number 11 retired in Boston, which he's going to have to go back on, which doesn't matter to him. These guys can say what they want. It doesn't affect them one way or the other. But it sounds like he really is very intrigued by coming and playing in Brooklyn. The Knicks still want him. The Knicks still think they got a shot because of the Kevin Durant thing. We'll see about that. But, the big question here for the Nets is, when you look at what happened with Kyrie this past season in Boston, it was really a disaster. I mean, the fact that he was, the number one player and alleged leader of that team, that was a disaster from his standpoint. He was terrible as a leader. Coachability-wise with Brad Stevens, he obviously had his problems, so you wonder how that's going to help, or you wonder how that's going to translate with Kenny Atkinson, who isn't Brad Stevens, don't get me wrong, but he's a good young coach, knows what he's doing. And then, the other thing is the Nets have a lot of young players, and the problem with Kyrie was in terms of dealing with his young teammates in Boston, getting along with people, that was a catastrophe. You saw that. So I don't know how it's all going to work out if he comes to Brooklyn, but I think the Nets will probably – what they're thinking is, he's 26, 27. He's going to mature. We'll get him a better mix of young players. He had a bad mix up there. They'll explain it away because here's the bottom line, Ryan, as you know. Talent trumps all. If you can get a talent like Kyrie Irving and you're the Brooklyn Nets, you know what? You go after him. And if he wants to come back and play for the team he grew up rooting for, you give him a max contract and you hope that things shake out better than they did in Boston. So if Tobias Harris is the guy that Kyrie is recruiting, I mean, you know what? The Nets will take that. I mean, look, they made that trade, what was it, last week to get 2 max slots because they obviously know this is what you can sell Kyrie on. It's important to get that second slot so he can help you bring in the second player he wants to play with. The only thing I'll say is he's going to be miscast as the number one guy, I still think. He can only play, I would take him on my team if I had a Kevin Durant who's better than him, or a LeBron James, or maybe a Kawhi Leonard. After that, I don't want Kyrie being my best player. That to me does not bode well.
I agree. And you mentioned LeBron James. What about LA? Because there's murmurs of that. Is there any chance that he goes out there with LeBron? No. Here's the thing. He's been there and done that, and I reported a lot of other people. When you're playing with LeBron, you're going to go to finals, and you're going to win a championship. But if you're a player who wants his own team and wants to be the man and wants to be, it's all about you, you can't play with LeBron because it's always all about LeBron. And LeBron just takes the oxygen out of the room. LeBron dominates a locker room and a franchise like nobody else in sports. And the Lakers are finding that out now, just as Miami found out and Cleveland have found out. And those guys who play with him, you have to be a special player to deal with LeBron James. Just ask Dwayne Wade and Chris Bosh. And Kyrie couldn't deal. It got to the point his last year, he didn't want to be there anymore in Cleveland. He wanted to go away from LeBron. So, no, I would not think at all. That would be the stunner of all stunners if somehow he decided, I'll go back and play with LeBron again and put up with his nonsense, all the stuff he didn't like out in Los Angeles, because LeBron hasn't changed. Right, and he's not going to change. There's a lot of things that are out of his hands.
No, he's not going to change.
No.
And that's the thing about the Lakers. Now, they're still, they could get Anthony Davis, so don't sleep on them. But that's still the thing is they've got a max slot for somebody. It would be a move other than to trade for Anthony Davis. The big question is who wants to play with LeBron, because all these players know because they talk and everybody knows what everybody has gone through. LeBron is very difficult to deal with. Yeah, you're going to, if he's healthy and he's into it and focused and, playing still at the top of the sport when he's 34, 35 years old, you're going to go places. But the downside is you're not going to be the man. You're going to you're taking the secondary role to LeBron is really secondary.
Mitch, before we let you go, I want to ask you one more question. When you talk about the Pelicans and the Lakers, which player is more valuable to the Pelicans, a guy like Jason Tatum or the Lakers' 4th overall pick?
Well, Jason Tatum would be, but here's the thing. This is the way you got to think of this. If Danny Ainge knows that Kyrie Irving is not coming back, he's not going to trade for Anthony Davis, I don't think. That's the problem for Boston because he's not going to break up his team to bring in Anthony Davis. He's not going to. He's going to have to give up Tatum.
Right.
To do that. And the 4th pick is you're not going to get Jason Tatum with the 4th pick.
Right.
Jason Tatum is much better. It's a 3-player draft. It's Zion Williamson, it's John Morant. And if the Knicks are smart, they'll take R.J. Barrett and go about their business. The 4th pick could be any one of 2 or 3 players, I guess. So, here's the deal. From what I understand, David Griffin really wants Kyle Kuzma. The Lakers right now don't want to give him Kyle Kuzma. But I think when push comes to shove, Kyle Kuzma is going to be part of that package with Ingram, Lonzo Ball, whatever they have to give him, because that's the way it's going to have to be. That's going to be his best offer because Boston, it makes no sense unless Kyrie were coming back. It makes no sense to go after Anthony Davis, right? Because if you're going to gut your team and you bring in Anthony Davis, you kind of have the Pelicans, right?
Yeah. Man, it's going to be interesting. That's what I do know. And the season ends last night, and it seems like it's starting. Like the real season is starting now today. Mitch Lawrence, thanks for spending a few minutes of your time with me today. Writer for the Sporting News and Forbes. Follow him on Twitter at Mitch_Lawrence. Mitch, have a great weekend, man.
Ryan, great job. Thanks a lot, man. Okay.
All right, man. Take care.
Thank you.